Back with another installment, folks, for the top 5 greatest players in each NBA franchises. Last edition was the Dallas Mavericks. This time, it's the Denver Nuggets. And then next time will be the Detroit Pistons. If it's your first time catching a video in the series, I got the link to the playlist both in the description box and the comments, so check it out. And for those of you that also don't know, what I'm doing with this series is I put a rule that I can only use a player one time in the entire series. So I can only use LeBron James once through the series. I can only use Dikembe Mutombo once through the series. I can only use, Allen Iverson once, so he won't be on this list at all. But with that being said, though, let's get into it. First, I'm going to start off with a few honorable mentions. We're going to go with, you guys might remember him, he was a center for the Nuggets, longtime Denver Nugget, Nene. Now, Nene was never an all-star, but he was always a body in the paint. He could always get you points. He could always block inside the paint. He was at least a productive role player. And he was one of the better centers. Not a great center, but one of the better centers of his time. And at least worthy of a mention. And we're going to go next one, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. You guys remember him? He was one of those guys that was on the verge of breaking out and becoming an all-star. Now, this is a bit of a controversial subject because he basically pulled a Colin Kaepernick in the 90s before Colin Kaepernick. His deal was he wouldn't put his hand over his heart, if I remember correctly. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because of his faith during the national anthem. And eventually he kind of got low-key blackballed from the league. But he was a guy who was looking like he had some promise, though, on the court. And could be a star before all that went down. But he's at least worthy of a mention. And then my last honorable mention is a current Denver Nugget. It's Michael Porter Jr. He was a key role player. It's one of their go-to three-point shooters. He was a role player in that championship win in 2023. When he's on, he can still produce and be a good number 2 guy for that team. And certainly someone worthy of recognition. Now, with that, we're on to the actual top 5 itself. This is going to be an old school one. We're going to throw it back to the mid-70s. David Thompson, a 3-time All-Star for the Denver Nuggets, known as the Skywalker for his amazing leaping ability, similar to guys like Jordan and T-Mac before those guys came along. He was one of those original high-jumping players during his tenure with the Nuggets. He did make 3 All-Star games. He was one of the leaders of that team. And certainly exciting player playing a game a little bit ahead of his time. Even got players that era like Bill Walton gave him praise. Michael Jordan kind of acknowledged him as a bit of an inspiration. I mean, he didn't last too long in Denver. But hey, he was a good player. He did have it, and he had a bit of an influence on guys after him. Those guys that are amazing leapers. Like T-Mac, like Jordan, so on and so forth. So for that, he deserves a nod. Now moving on to number 4. Some people might feel I'm ranking him a little too low, but the reason why I'm putting him here is because he didn't last long there, and that's Dikembe Mutombo. Like I said, going off the rule that I can only use a player once that I created, it makes it a little bit tough here. And the reason why is because Dikembe played for various teams. He was a journeyman, a great journeyman, but a journeyman. It was tough to kind of pick a team. But I went with the Denver Nuggets because, I figured Atlanta Hawks, I gave some of the other old school guys the acknowledgement. Dikembe, it all started there in Denver, number 1. And number 2, that's where he first built his name. He became the shot blocking machine. We all know the finger wag. No. And not to mention, he was a key part of the first series in the NBA playoff history where an 8 seed beat the 1 seed. The Denver Nuggets upset the Seattle Supersonics. Was it 93, somewhere between 92 to 94? It was the first time an 8 seed beat a 1 seed. Dikembe Mutombo helped lead the Nuggets to a big run. And he helped give that franchise some life, in the early 90s. And said he was Weasley, one of the greatest shot blockers of all time. You guys, you've seen his highlights. You get him inside the paint. He'd block your shot 2, 3, 4 times. But I'll start with the Denver Nuggets. But the reason I picked him here is because some of the other teams he played for, like the Hawks, I found some other players to put in there. For the Sixers, he didn't really last long. There's plenty of other players that come to mind. For the Nuggets, though, he stands out as one of those main guys. But yeah, Dikembe Mutombo, easily one of the an all-time great player, great human, great defensive presence. And he led the Denver Nuggets that first 8-seed series and led them to a deep playoff run. So it's certainly worthy of a nod. But the reason I have him number 4 is because his tenure there didn't last long. But when he was there, he was always a presence to be felt. Number 3, I'm going to go, this is where I go with Carmelo Anthony. I was thinking between the Nuggets or Knicks, but I went with the Nuggets because I already found some old school players from the glory years of the Knicks in the 70s, like Walt Clyde Frazier, Willis Reed for that, spoiler alert. But I'm going with Carmelo Anthony with the Denver Nuggets. He was there for a good chunk of time from 03-04 through 2010. And, during his tenure there, they only had one deep playoff run, but they were usually in the playoffs. Almost every season, Carmelo was with the Nuggets. And, and he was always one of their lead scorers. Carmelo always was fun to watch, too. He helped make a difference with the Denver Nuggets, at least kept them relevant. They only had one deep playoff run. That was in 2009 with Chauncey Billups, where they made it to the Western Conference Finals. Where Carmelo Anthony, was a great scorer, and he always kept the Nuggets in the mix during that era. Certainly worthy of a nod. Now, number 2, I'm going to go with Alex English. He's the all-time Denver Nuggets lead scorer. He kept them relevant during the hipster era of the Nuggets. You guys know the hipster uniforms of the Nuggets from the 80s. He was the heart and soul of that franchise during the 80s, during that era, the Bird, Johnson, Jordan era. Like I said, he's the all-time lead scorer, and he, as of now, prior to Jokic, was considered the greatest Denver Nugget of all time. So he certainly stands in the record books. His jersey was retired by the team. But then, now that leads to number 1. The number 1 player. Nikola Jokic, current center for the Denver Nuggets. He was from Serbia. He was taken in the 2014 draft in the second round during a Taco Bell commercial. But by the time he stepped on the court, that didn't matter. In his time with the Denver Nuggets, he's a 3-time regular season MVP. He led the Denver Nuggets to their only finals win to date in 2023, was finals MVP, and he's considered by a lot to be the best player in the NBA currently. He's the guy who made the Denver Nuggets relevant again and brought them their first championship win, the lead guy behind that. Certainly, in over the past 10 years, has done enough to my eyes to be considered the greatest Denver Nugget of all time, and they could still do more. But there's my list. You guys comment. Let me know what you think of this list. You can comment. Let me know. You can give me your top 5 Nuggets if you want. You're more than welcome to in the comments. Drop a like. Subscribe for more content. And coming up next in this series, doing the Detroit Pistons. So stay tuned.